Hello. So we continue today's discussion, and here we are starting to see or understand some of the characteristics underlying business management. Some of the characteristics underlying business management. What are these characteristics? And basically, per what I have talked about them so far, you could just infer in terms of the discussion, you could infer as some of the discussion. So one of the most important characteristics of business management is the interrelatedness of the environmental factors. So as I said, everything, the macro environment basically tends to affect the micro, and the micro environments too tends to affect, because if businesses, in terms of what happens in the business, if businesses do not perform, it will also affect the output of the whole macro economy. And if the market is undermined, it tends to affect both the micro, because if the market is not, functioning, the businesses will be affected that at the micro level. And once they get affected, it also affects at the macro level. So they are very, very interrelated. As I said, you can even talk about the world crisis in 2008. It's not just South Africa. Most developing countries suffered, and most developing countries suffered. So there's some form of interrelatedness within the macro variables, and even within the sub environmental variables. Another characteristics of the business environment is the increasing instability and change. Increasing instability and change. Now, what you should know is that there is when there's a lot of economic fluctuations, instability, and there's also a change to them. So how do you adjust yourself? What are the instabilities that we are talking about? The instability, because of the interrelatedness, has made the whole environment complex. It becomes, and as the environment becomes complex, it doesn't just change, but it also becomes unstable, because people, you cannot base upon your predictions that this is how the market is going to be, this is how the production level is going to be. Once you tend to produce, you realize that you may think that, oh, today is the taste of people are going for iPhone 12, or people's tastes are going for this particular phone. Because of the unstable nature in the environment, you realize that sometimes some of the goods come and do not able to survive, because their predictions, they became unstable. Their predictions were not in line with what was in there. So in terms of a stable prediction, they were looking forward that once they produce, the goods will be accepted. However, in terms of the economic fluctuation, it becomes so greater that it affects these industries. That makes the whole systems unstable. That makes the whole system unstable. You can also talk about environmental uncertainty. You can also talk about environmental uncertainty. Now, when you talk about environmental uncertainty, that is whether we have confidence in the management or the information that we have today. So in terms of the information that goes on, are they reliable enough? Is the environment safe enough for us to get our businesses to the market? And basically, this amount of information that management have about environmental variables tends to affect the nature of businesses. We can also talk about the complexity of the environment. And basically, this is what I've been talking about since this presentation, that as they are interrelated, and as new things are coming up, as things are changing, and as we try to explore all these things, it has made the whole environment nature very, very complex. It has made the whole environment nature very, very, very complex. So as I said, we are taking now this sub-environment, that is the micro, the market, and the macro. We are taking them individually and are going to explain or examine them better. So I've mentioned a lot of things under this environment. Now, under the micro environment, there are some variables that we should be concerned with. And the three main the three main variables here is the business vision, mission, strategies, and objectives. And another variable is the business management on its functions, organizational functions. And the last one is the resources. So and the vision and the mission, as we said, as a business, basically the macro environment, as we said, these are the internal things, what occurs in the business itself. So basically what occurs in the business itself is that they should have their vision, they should have their mission, they should have a strategy in achieving this mission, and they have objectives. So you set this objective, you set a target for them. What are the means of obtaining? So this is what you should know. And one thing you should know as a business is that whatever mission or vision and the strategy that you set, it tends to affect the business, because these are basically what the company tends to. And your objective also will be developed into strategies such that people will grow the market and the businesses. So you have a mission that and a vision that inspires people as to what they should do, and your objective through strategies will help it realize. So as I said, you can either look at the mission statement. Basically, as you go to most companies, you see a chapter of their ambition and vision, and just to give you as to what's basically the business do, and it most sure that business thrive. It makes sure that businesses are and the people involved in the organization of the business, either the labor or them, work efficiently to ensure businesses grow. So you can look at a company such as the South African Post Office, and you can compare it with that of DHL. So DHL is basically a global company, and the South African Post Office is a state-owned agency, or a local. That is, if I say local, means that it's a national business. It's in this country. With DHL, it is in other countries. Right? You can look at compare their the mission and vision, and you see how basically these things work. We can also continue and talk about the management functions. Now, the management functions, basically, we and the organizational function, these are basically should be stated, and in terms of they should be know what they actually their roles are about, and how they manage their finances, in terms of the market management, in terms of their human management. All these things are things that are part of the managerial roles and their functions. So if they're able to control them in terms of the marketing functions, in terms of their financial functions, and in terms of their human management, all these forms of management keeps the businesses. So I've mentioned three major things here. And the marketing, basically, those are people who tries to, so under the functions, if you talk about the marketing management functions, they concerns with consumers. They are consuming. How do they want to understand the preferences or how things are going? What is the new trend? How do we try to adjust our businesses? How do we go about our businesses? Should we just approach people, or should we just create an Instagram account? How do we go about it? Because this is the world way of doing businesses today. People are creating Instagram to make money. People are as people get more followers, and they try to sell goods to them. People advertise, and people do YouTube, and people advertise. When people see that you're having a lot of businesses, you see them engage and follow you. As you have more followers, people tend to pay you or do advert on your platform, and you try to earn something. So a whole lot of marketing strategies are going on. And also in terms of the financial, we can talk about management. How do you raise revenue? How do you settle taxes? How do you try to keep interest rates in a best position so that the business do not suffer? And how do you make sure that all this help the company? We can also talk about the human resource. And as a company, this is very important, because you should know the level of resource personnel that are needed to make sure that you get the optimal of businesses. You don't just, as a goodwill. And this is basically one thing that makes government businesses suffer, because in government businesses, because government wants to create employment, it tends to overemploy. Sometimes it's not about just employing to that level. Sometimes it just gives certain motivations to the labor resource or the human resource, and you realize that even few people can achieve what 20 people can achieve what 100 would achieve. So these are some of the management functions that a business should be able to concern with. The last important under the micro environment, in terms of one important variable, is the resources. It's resources, and resources, as I said, we will know that the natural resources basically that are needed, or everything, either resources from the businesses, resources, natural resources, everything that is being needed by the business. And when you talk about this one, we can talk about the tangible resource, the intangible resource, and organizational capacity. So in terms of the tangible resource, basically the production facilities, the raw materials, the financial resource, properties, the computers, the things that we can see with our eyes, the machine hardware, and the warehouses, all these things are part of the tangible resources. We can talk about the intangible resources, and the intangible resources here, we talk about the brand names, the brand names, these are very important because branding is very, very important. Sometimes it's not about that the product is maybe of good, but in terms of the brand, people want to use iPhone because yes, once I use iPhone, people would want to know that yes, I mean, even sometimes it's not about even using iPhone 12, but just the name of and the eye product, everybody goes to go with it. The brand, everybody knows that it's of quality. Samsung is of quality. Huawei, people want to go with the brand. But if people don't want to associate themselves with phones that do not have actually a good brand, because people tend to believe that it's not of good quality. So you can also talk about the patent and the trademarks. So the patents, basically the rights that is given to, solid right given to a company that in terms of producing. The patent laws, you have a special skill, so you need to, protect that skill, that people cannot just use your material. So in terms of book writing, in terms of music, every resource that you have, you should have some protection to that. You can also talk about the company's reputation. You can talk about company's reputation. We can also talk about the technical knowledge. You can also talk about the organizational morale and accumulated experience. All these things are under the intangible resources. We can also talk about the organizational capacity, organizational capability. Organizational capability. Basically, this here we combine the resources, people, and processes in a particular way. So in terms of organizational capability, how do you combine resources? How do you connect with people, and how in terms of process? And these are things that as an organization you should be concerned with. So we continue with the second sub environment, that is the business and the market environment. As I said, I explained what the market goes about, what goes into the market. But however, there are 5 main set of variables, and we are going to take each 5 of these variables, and we are going to go under them. I'm going to discuss them in details. So under the market environment, where we talk about where consumers have the purchasing power, the 5 main variables under the market environment. First is the market. The market itself, or in terms of where people meet to exchange. So at first, when we talk of a market, it could be, a place where buyers and sellers meet. But today, in terms of it's not a place anymore, it could be where buying and selling transacts, because today markets can be online markets. It can be a place where you go to shop. So we have different forms of market in terms of the world today. And the world today keeps changing. The world today keeps changing. And one thing about the business market in terms of the market is to know who has the purchasing power. As a firm, you should be able to identify who has the purchasing power and the conditions in the marketplace. What are the conditions that are available in the marketplace? Once you're able to determine all these important variables in the market, what are the conditions in the marketplace, who has the purchasing power, this is where you'll be able to influence. Because if you know that if the purchasing power is in the hands of this particular group of people, your idea is to target people, produce to suit what they want in terms of their preferences. And once you have their preference need satisfied, you realize that you get the demand for the good that you have. So purchasing power also serve as an interface between the macro environment and the micro environment. It tends to serve as an interface between the micro environment and the micro environment. Why? Because the government also has some rules. The government also have some rules in here. The government tax individuals, and when the government tax individuals, that tax affects the income of the household. And when the income of the household is affected, it also affects its purchasing power. So One important thing about the purchasing power is disposable income. So disposable income is basically the income that goes to the household after taxation. So take note, if you're a worker, if somebody takes income, you'll be told that you are being paid 50,000 Rand or 100,000 Rand. But that money is not everything that goes to the household. There's some form of taxation that goes in there. When government tax, the final net income of this individual is what we call disposable income. This disposable income that is being used by the individual will also include other transfer income such as credit payment or maybe income from supplement income maybe your parents are giving to you. Those are part of your disposable income. It will come to you. But when your income is being taxed, you subtract that from your main income. And that remaining of that is what we call your disposable income. So it is important that we should know that in terms under the market, it's being affected by the macro level because it's the government who impose taxes, and these taxes affect your disposable income of the household. And this, once the disposable income of the household is affected, it tends to affect the purchasing power of the household. And the purchasing power is an important component under the market scenario. Then in terms of this market scenario, we also can talk about the consumers, because in terms of the purchasing power is basically in the hands of the consumers. It's in the hands of consumers, and consumers will basically concerned with durable products. Basically, they tend to go in for durable goods. They tend to go in for semi-durable goods. So when talk of durable goods, it's basically the furnitures, the domestic appliances, the motor cars. These are durable. The semi-durable goods, basically food and tobacco and services. Basically, these are the things the consumers will always want to see in terms of the purchasing power they have. So the market economy, we say it is very large and it's very complex, and it's also changing. So it's very large, very complex and changing. As I said, today it is not about you just going to a particular place just to buy like what we normally do. You can just go online, and we have the online market space where people do even buy, sell. You are not supposed to meet people interface. How this world becomes, the market space become complex? How do you as a business individual integrate so that your business will not just be in a shop thinking that people will be looking for your shop and they will come to buy? You should know that as a business today, you can just create an Instagram account. People just Google you, then they will just ask you to just ship it to them, and they send you the, first of all, please do make sure they send you the money before you undertake, because as a business environment, in terms of the online market becoming more complex, it is also leading to a whole lot of scams and other unfortunate things which are undermining the progress and the development of the new world order. Another important variable under the market environment is suppliers. And important variables is suppliers. How do business go about? Businesses basically start in terms of the level of production. Production is input, and these inputs are being what we call being supplied by suppliers. So businesses get this input, manufacture them into products. So suppliers can be in different forms. Sometimes it can be in terms of suppliers of raw materials, it can be suppliers of market, or it can be suppliers of finished goods. So as you should be able to know the levels of suppliers, but all what we know is that we should understand is that in terms of the market environment, there's some important variable which are the suppliers supply either your raw materials, either finished goods, either capital, even labors can become, sometimes become suppliers, because if as a market environment, if you want to do any business, labor tends to supply if they see that there may be the wage income, because that's basically what attracts supply of labor. If they see that the company pays good, and people would want to offer themselves, so it's a form of supply. So suppliers basically are the things that basically help business flourish. It helps business flourish. We can also talk about the labor market and the labor unions. The labor market and the labor unions. As I said, an important thing here is in terms of the wage level, the minimum wage. The minimum wage. So the minimum wage basically is where you cannot pay labor below. Nobody's supposed to pay a labor. You cannot employ somebody and pay the person below a certain amount of income or amount of wage. So the price of labor, or the fact of the money that is given to labor, is what we call wage. The money that is given to labor is what we call wage. So the labor market is basically influenced by the level, the labor supply, and the labor demand. The labor demand in terms of the businesses who are demanding for it, and the supply of labor. The supply of labor is the labor themselves, or the labor from the labor union. Sometimes there is the labor unions who may, in terms of if you want the supply of doctors, they form a union, and that is where you go to them for the supply to work in that particular sector. So in terms of the labor market, that is the demand. The demand is by the businesses. So all this market environment is interrelated. In terms of this labor market, it's very, very interrelated. The businesses need laborers to work. Laborers also need businesses to get income. So one goes in other. Now, most of the underlining these labor unions is the underlining this labor market are the labor unions. So the labor unions, basically people with similar skill set come together, and sometimes it's not just people with similar skill set. It can be maybe a union under a particular company. So maybe a union and ESCOM company. ESCOM as a company, the workers they form a union, and they can come from different skills. But sometimes a particular skills like maybe doctors society, or teacher society, who tends to maybe fight for the interest of their unions, either by threatening of strike or trying to bargain for higher wage or better conditions of services. We can also talk about the intermediaries. Now, intermediaries play a significant role between the manufacturer and the consumer. So they tend to link them. So as you produce, as the goods get finished, so they should move from the production level to the consumption level. Who are the people who come in there? So here we can talk about issues of wholesale and the retailers. So we have wholesale. So wholesale are people who tends to get it in bulk. Sometimes then the retailers goes to get it and they sell it in pieces for individuals. Sometimes to some people tends to be the same wholesale and the retail. So in terms of the business environment, the wholesale, the retail, we have a lot in South Africa. Pick and Pay. These are retailing shops, Spar, Woolworth, ShopRite. All these are kind of the intermediaries to tend to connect the management and or in terms of manufacturers and the businesses. We can also talk about competitors. As I said, competitors is when there are new entrants, or not just new entrants, like how the environment is. Basically, competitors comes in when they tend to see that there are no restrictions in there. There are no limit to entry or exit. And when they realize that a business is particularly doing well, then they all tend to come in to compete. So unlike ESCOM, which is, an individual base, I'm trying to look out for a company. So let's take a company like Pick and Pay. It's competing with ShopRite, is competing with Spar, is competing with Woolworth. So sometimes there's a price war. Some people tend to believe that if I go to Woolworth, I'll get most of Woolworth in terms of prices tends to be a little high. Not all the goods. Sometimes you go to Woolworth and the price tends to be low. But because of the mindset in terms of competition, there's some form of competition, price war. That is what we call the price war. Some tends to reduce their prices, and once they do that, they attract consumers. And another kind of competition that we can, in terms of the competing market, you can also talk about is the example is the telecommunications sector. So in terms of the MTN, the telco, one thing about this is that we have what we call a leader and then a follower. So those with a larger market share becomes the leader, and they have a price a little bit higher. So if, for example, if MTN is the market leader in South Africa, in terms of the telecommunication, if they tend to reduce the price, now the other small telecommunications who want more customers to are also forced to reduce the price. It's just to also attract more. So there's some form of price war in this in the business environment, and as a business entity, you should be able to and make yourself understand the issues in there and how competition goes about. So competition is always not a bad thing. I mean, however, there are certain factors that we should be able to, I should pinpoint to you. Now, in terms of there's new entries, or in terms of that's what I've talked about, there are new entries into the market. So whenever there's profits, people do come in. We can also talk about the buying power of clients and consumers. So the buying power of clients and consumers. You can also talk about the strength of suppliers in terms of competition. So if we are in terms of competition, who has actually the supply? If you're stronger in the market, you realize that people want to supply to you because they know that they will get their income. The number of competitors in the market is also important. Sometimes if you do not cap it, competition basically leads to lower prices because everybody wants to reduce the price to attract more consumers. And such it's good for the consumer, but for the producers. So sometimes they tend to, come together. And in terms of economics explanation, this is what we call the oligopoly. They tend to come together and try to settle issues and so that they don't let the competition lead to them. Because if the more you compete, it reduces your profits. Though it's good for the consumer, reducing prices. That, however, it has its own other sides. We can also talk about the threat of substitution product availability. So when we talk of substitution products, for example, we have full cream milk in terms of the milk industry here. The paper milk here, we have the full cream, we have the Pick and Pay milk, we have other forms of milk brands. So these are all forms of substitution. Basically, when talk of substitution, goods that are actually of the same product, but just that you may want to, in terms of there could be brand difference. So if maybe full cream milk, the long life UHT, if the price increase, you want to switch to Pick and Pay milk, you want to switch to, so basically there's some form of the substitution threat. You should be able to be aware of the competition in here. You should be able to be aware of the competition in here. So we continue our discussion on the market environment, and basically, these are all issues I've talked about. I've talked about the markets in terms of the satisfying needs of people, in terms of the consumer needs, the purchasing power behavior, and the disposable income. We can also continue with the market types. So the types of the markets is where we can talk about the consumer market, and with the consumer market, basically is what I talked about, and I limited myself to in terms of the consumer market. We talk about the durability of goods, and we talked about the durable goods, semi-durable goods, and the products and services. And we can also talk about the industrial market. So industrial market basically concerns with the manufacturing of goods, the services that are being produced. Then we can also talk about the government's market, which basically involves the purchase of products and services by the central government, provinces, and other local authorities. So here, government also has its market where it involves in purchasing. How do we supply our local provinces some goods? Where do they government purchase? And this market, in terms of government, most of the government purchases goes to what we call procurement. It goes to procurement. We can also talk about the international market. International market, where basically foreign buyers, basically international market, foreigners meet. It's more of the whole world order. So it's a system where foreign meets, and we can talk about the World Trade Organization. We can talk about African Continental Free Trade. All these are meant so that the goods can be moved from one country to the other. And these are forms of market, and they tend to affect the environment. Once you understand this market, so that as a business entity, you should know that it's your business in terms of the market you are trying to produce to. Are you just producing to the consumer? Because we have people who just target consumer, people who just target maybe even supplying to just industry. Maybe I'm a cook and I just supply the industry and market, maybe some food or stuff. maybe I'm trying to produce to the government because maybe I'm a government contracted individual who produce and sell it to the market for government to purchase from me directly in terms of, or I'm selling to the international market where I'll be able to see my goods go beyond the borders of my country. Okay, so basically I've talked about the suppliers. I've talked about everything under the supply in terms of the raw materials. I've also talked about the labor union. Sorry, I was not moving my cursor. I've talked about the labor unions under the market environment. And I've also talked about intermediaries. I've also talked about the competitors. And I've talked about the competitors. And now it's for me to talk about the macro environment. So for the macro environment, basically this is more bigger because we are looking at the whole national issues, and what happened at the macro level tends to affect the micro. And we said that they are interrelated. There's some interrelatedness in the macro. However, even within the macro environment too, there are some form of relationship. There's some form of, because for example, if there is inflation, it tends to affect exchange rate, it tends to affect interest rates. So there are some form of relationship among the macro variables as well, and makes the whole situation a complex world. So under the macro environment, I earlier talked about some of the things that are under it, and we continue our discussion. This time we are looking at the technological environment. First, we are looking at the technological environment. So as I said, in terms of technological environment, there's a whole lot of innovations that are ongoing. And these innovations basically are made to come to light. And the only way to get this kind of innovation is through research and development, what most books term as the R&D, research and development. So this tends to help to, once you do involve in research, and you get to find out new processes, methods, and services, and even how to even make sure that you produce at a far cheaper cost. Because with new technology, you realize that maybe you need not these machines to produce how you used to produce your good. For example, even in the bread industry, at first they used to use their hand in terms of the mixing. Today they are mixing machines. So the mixing machine can mix more in terms of the quantum, as to how the amount they can mix more than at a particular point in time, compared to just using the human, which may be time consuming. So there are a lot of technological innovations, and researches are continuing, and these are vital. In terms of the technological environment too, you can also talk about the issues of, modern Twitter, Facebook. All these things are forms of business environment that are helping businesses thrive. So it's not about just connecting of individuals, but people are connecting to the world and selling their goods. People are making money from these accounts, and exploring artificial intelligence, AI, robotics. All these things are technological development. And under this technological development, we can also try to look at this same technological development in different important areas. We can talk about water technology and others. We can also relate this concept in terms of South Africa. Now, water environment, I believe you guys are aware of the water crisis that Cape Town had somewhere 2008, prior to 2008, 2017, 2018, thereabout. Yes, and as I said, I'm still in Cape Town. So to date, it's better that these issues have resolved. Now, water technology, you realize that if we tend to rely on other means of, like, just converting streams and others to consumable water use, we should find means of also other ways of getting new water. So in terms of today, there are machines that are able to, even once you put them on your roofing, is able to use some form of moisture to condemn moisture and make sure that moisture comes out and get some form of water in there. So there's a whole lot of issues going on in terms of the mining technology too. This is an important aspect to South Africa. South Africa has been South Africa and Ghana in terms of gold and wise tends to be the leading in the world. Now, there have been low investment in this sector because the test of the technology, once investors come in, they realize that they are not getting the needed minerals that are needed. So South Africa is blessed with minerals. Even if you are look at there are some gold deposits in a whole lot of South African lands. So we need to make sure that we get the technology that are needed to help us grow and develop. We can also talk about the marine technology in terms of here we talk about our coastal lines, water resources, water areas, water border lines, and there's a lot of technology that we can be able to transform this marine site into tourist attraction, investment attraction, or even a site where people can make some form of, because it tends to be one of the aspects that the country needs to develop. We can also talk about agriculture and veterinary technology. And in terms of South Africa, in terms of most agricultural lands today, if you have new technology, you need not to use the cutlass and hoe. You can use tractors and other advanced means of technology, irrigation technology that will help the agriculture, make agriculture more productive. Veterinary too, with new inventions, it helps in terms of animal monitoring and making sure that, because we need them, we need animals, we need to make sure that they're in the right state for us to coexist. We can also talk about the medical technology. I don't know if you've seen the new building. Sorry for the background noise. If you see the new medical hospital that has been opened in Pretoria, a very sophisticated medical center. So we need all of this, because with these new medical centers, it's what is needed for us to thrive and develop. We can also talk about transport technology. We can talk about transport technology. Transport technology here includes cars, includes buses, includes rails and others, and also even airlines. So in terms of even talk about the trains, today we have fast trains, we have moving fastest moving trains, and these are all new technologies that are developing, and it helps to increase productivity, because if you use this faster training, it means that people can move from one point to the other, goods can be transferred to other places in the shortest possible time. We can also talk about power technology. As I speak, I know you know the power situation we have in South Africa, but we need to find new means of, cheaper ways of getting energy, getting power. So today there's advocacy for us to move to solar energy and move to more cheaper source of energy, because once we rely on solar, we will not be having issues of whether there's shortage of coal, or whether there's some form of resource inability, because the sun is always there to power our machines, and we'll be able to make sure that businesses have power to survive. Other aspect of, in terms of another component under the macro environment after the technological, is the economic environment. Now, the economic environment, as I said, is very, very important, because this is where the states, in terms of investment, in terms of everything that is being done, people tend to look at this indication, whether the economy is doing well or not. So some of these variables we can talk about is the economic growth rate. South Africa currently is being struggling to have its growth at least about 5%. However, there's a more prospect that it can achieve. So economic growth rate is very important. We can also talk about the level of employment, how the level of employment, because once there's economic growth, it means that then there's a lot of income in the economy. Businesses can expand and they can employ more people. We can also talk about the consumer income. Now, the consumer income here, when government, what is the wage level, or yes, when people work, what is their wage level? How are people surviving? Are people able to increase wealth in terms of the economy? Because some environments, tries to create wealth for individual because of the nature or the economic systems in them. We can also talk about the rate of inflation. Inflation is basically the persistent increase in prices of goods and services. So the persistent increase in price of goods and services. What we should know is that inflation is not always bad, but however, the level at which it increases is what is needed. So in South Africa, currently we are practicing what we call the inflation targeting policy. It's one of the monetary policies that are being practiced by the central bank. So with inflation targeting policy, basically we set a bandwidth where we believe that when prices adjust by that rate, it will ensure some form of stability in the economy. And that is what the country needs to grow. So basically set between 3 to 6, but however, South Africa is one of the countries practicing, other African countries are practicing. However, it has been unsuccessful in some countries because it still tends to go beyond even double tickets. So, inflation is not always bad, but the rate at which it increases, when inflation is not controlled, it affects the whole market economy. For example, in 2008 Zimbabwean situation, when inflation gets to that rate of being worse, the value of money, people do not want to use money to transact because the whole economic system is, being thrown away. Barter system now takes over and a whole lot of issues come about. So inflation is very, very important. It's very, very important that it affects aspects. When prices keeps increasing and your income remains constant, you realize that you are unable. So inflation simply means that if you are having 2,000 rand and you are able to purchase 10 baskets of goods and services, and now there's higher inflation, and with the same 10,000 rand, you cannot purchase this 10 baskets of goods and services, but you can now purchase just 5 of them. It means that you move from the same income has the same goods that you've been purchasing. Now its amount has reduced. That is what is the meaning of inflation in terms of a simple term. We can also talk about interest rates. Now, interest rate is also important because it affects whether businesses would want to borrow or not. Now, with higher interest rates, the cost of borrowing means that the cost of borrowing is high, so it doesn't favor businesses to engage in business activity. So it's all in the environmental situation. We can talk about exchange rate. That is the dollar or the rand to a dollar, or the differences in countries' currency. That is what we call exchange rates. How much of $1 is to, if you have $1, how much will you get to it in terms of rand? So if you need more rand to get just a single dollar, we say that then the rand has depreciated in value. But if now you need less of rand to get more of dollars, we say that the rand has appreciated in value. So it is very important because most of the market environment, in terms of the goods that are being produced, some of the goods sometimes, in terms of the input, basically are being imported from other countries, and the level of exchange rate tends to affect. Also, if a country tends not to produce, because as we transact in this interrelated world order, as countries export from their goods to other, if South African do not export to other countries, we do not able to get our foreign reserves. We're not able to get foreign exchange to stabilize our currency. So it's very important. That is how the world, the macro environment makes it more complex in that situation. We can talk about the fiscal and monetary policy. Fiscal monetary policy. Monetary policy, basically, I've talked about some of them here. Let me also go back to it. Basically, here we talk about the central bank decision, and basically that is one of the main differences between the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. The central bank basically concerns itself with the monetary policy, and the Ministry of Finance concerns itself with fiscal policy. However, both of them always work together to ensure that the economy is stable. So the monetary policy, they basically deal with the supply of money, printing of more money into the system, the level of inflation in terms of the interest rates. So basically, that's how the monetary policies, all these things tends to, if the government want the business environment to prosper and inject more money into the system, like what in this COVID situation, the government have announced injecting 500 billion rand into the economy. This is the means to, in terms of these injections, the means to help the spring up development, or spring up some kind of increasing purchasing power of individuals for the businesses to thrive. You can also talk about the fiscal policy. Fiscal policy here concerns with taxations and expenditure patterns of government. So that is what the fiscal policy itself concerns about. If government tends to increase taxes or tends to raise revenue through taxes, because basically that's the main source of government, through taxations. So if they tend to increase taxes, though it's a revenue for them to do good things for the economy, it also tends to affect the purchasing power of consumers, which also affect businesses, because once consumers' purchasing power is being affected, they cannot, transact or purchase goods as they should. So, as they should. Another important aspect under the business environment, the macro environment. So in the macro environment, we talk about the technology, we talk about the economic, we are now talking about the social. The social environment is also very, very important, and it's very important in the sense that it's a situation that we need to concern ourselves with. We can talk about the demographics nature, in terms of the distribution of the economy, the population growth, because once the population is growing, it puts a whole lot of pressure on certain resources, and we should know how these population patterns, affect businesses. We should be able to understand how the trajectory of population is growing. Is it more of a younger generation? What kind of clothing should they produce to satisfy this group situation? This group, what kind of is there more of males or more females, so that you know the kind of goods and services that you can target in terms of this environment. Another important is that in the terms of the social environment is urbanization. So as the world or the population grows, you realize that in some community that was a rural community, see more people come in, and as the more people come in, it moves from just being a rural community to become an urbanized community. So that's what we call urbanization, where there's a large form of individuals coming together, and with there's more people come together, we realize that a whole lot of business activity tends to take off. People, they've seen more infrastructure development and things going on. Another important aspect under the social environment is the level of education. People getting more education sees that it tends to affect the macro environment. So it's important in today's world that you cannot be an individual without education. So even people who are in this era who are not educated, we've tried to find a means of some night classes or some form of means to educate themselves so that they become abreast with certain issues of today. There's also the changing role of women through education, through advertisement, through encouragement. Today realizes that gender issues are now everywhere, where we see women in charge, women take positions. Today in America, we have a woman vice president. Hopefully soon, we will also see that South Africa will also have a woman president, because today we realize that women are actually important. They are not just for the kitchen, they are not just for the home, but they are very important in terms of decision making and development. And a wise man once said that if you educate a man, you educate an individual, but if you educate a woman, you educate a whole nation. Today we have Tanzania, who had a vice president woman, today has a woman president. So there's a changing role of women. Women are moved from the concept of being less skilled, and today they are in the world today. The Queen Elizabeth, they are German Chancellor Angela Merkel. These are people who are changing the world today. So women are actually important. We can talk about consumerism. So consumerism, as I said earlier in our first tutorial, where consumers try to come together to protect their interests, to make sure that goods that are being sold are not expired, goods that are being sold are produced to quality. So these are all some form of the social environment that that is ongoing. You can also talk about the social responsibility and the business environment. This is very important, and this is going to be what our next discussion is going to be about. The responsibility. As a business, you should be concerned with the environment. Sorry for the background noise. As a business, you should be concerned with the the environment. That is, if you are making profit from the environment, you should also be able to give back to the environment, and you should be able to also go make sure that you undertake all the ethics that are needed. You do not to, think that consumers are not going to read the labels, so you tend to produce expired goods and sell it to people. All these are corporate social responsibility when businesses tends to help their community in which they live. Because if a business is able to construct rules for 8 people, the people are also see the need that they do not have to move from that community, and they still stay there and purchase the goods to ensure that the business survive. Another social concern that we can also talk about is HIV and AIDS. In South Africa, about 20%, out of the population, about 7 million plus have been diagnosed of having living with the HIV/AIDS. Not just that, because we should also ensure that we have, a healthy workforce, and we should be able to have, because once we have a healthy workforce, we therefore have a reliable labor supply. We have a reliable consumer purchase, and they can work and achieve money. We can also talk about the culture. Culture is also very important in terms of the fact that it's also changing culture, how people believe. What are there? Some people believe to be eating this, others believe not to be eating this. There's some form of culture diversity. Culture keeps changing. We are open to new things, and with these new ideas, we're trying to change the pattern as to how we go about even our form of wedding, our form of dressing, our form of graduation, how these things pattern. All these are important in the business world. All these are important in the business world. Under the macro environment too, we can also talk about the physical environment. So the physical environment here, basically, just to summarize it, basically the environmental issues, and the environmental issues, overpopulation, is becoming an issue of concern. The world is hitting almost 8 billion, and I don't know, I don't want to bring some conspiracy theories here in this presentation, but there are a whole lot of conspiracy theories going on, that some people intend to reduce the population size. No, I'm not talking about, I'm not going to follow such a discussion here. And so there's overpopulation in Africa, Asia. Africa is about almost close to more than 1.5 billion people. Asian, China, and India, you can talk about the population size alone. The US, these are countries with, higher population. And in Africa, Nigeria tends to be the most populated country. All this tends to affect the physical environment. We can also talk about the food, because once there's overpopulation, then issues that we concern ourselves with: food insecurity, the food shortage, and whether we are going to be able to feed the population as they grow. Another issue that we also concern ourselves with: water, because whether the population that are coming up, whether they will have reliable water. Though in terms of the world order, and water seems to be available in abundance. 70% of the global world is water, and 30% is land, though blessed by geography. However, still households still struggle to get water, and the water, we talk about the water quality. So how do we transform water, making sure that we get efficient need of water that are needed to be used by household? We can talk about energy and climate. And energy, because these are important aspects of growth: electricity, fuel, and the kind of energy that we use tends to affect the climate nature. And climate nature is that we should be concerned with the climate environment, because if the climate is affected, it affects agricultural productivity and it affects food production. So there's always interrelationship, as I said, among these variables. We can also talk about biodiversity in terms of the environment issue. We can also talk about the opportunities and threats of businesses. So as this environment tends to work out, one thing you should know is that it can become an opportunity, or it can become a threat to business. Threat to business here, we can look at the cost of energy, the growing cost of population, because some of the new technological advancement tends to bring about new ways, new means, and the energy cost may be reduced. However, in terms of some form of technologies too that are coming up tends to also exploit the whole environment that leads to population and environmentalism. So we should be concerned with issues and leads to scarcity of resources. Another important macro environment variable is the institutional governmental environment. So you should know that government decisions, government activities tend to also put a whole lot of pressure on management. So political pressures also affect management. That is one thing we should know. Now, in terms of the government, this government environment, then we should be able to speak about issues of the legislation in terms of the taxations. Are they favorable for business survival? Are they government giving imports? If you're importing goods into the economy, what are the controls? Because if you're importing something that is being produced in South Africa and government do not protect this businesses, you realize that those goods that are coming in, if they are cheaper, tends to affect local production, and consumers are basically going to go for the most cheaper commodity. This affects the businesses, local businesses, and affects the economy as a whole. It makes the economy dependent. So a lot of discussions are going on to encourage import substitution, and that is a way of, with this import substitution, government tries to, limit certain inflows of certain goods that are being produced into the economy, and also encourage rather promotion of the goods that are produced so that they can get to other countries and so that South Africa can benefit from. So that is where we talk about the import tariffs, we talk about price controls, and talk about the health regulations. So price control, like the bread industry, there are a lot of regulations in the health control. As a student, sometimes you need to get your health insurance. All these are regulations and tends to affect the institutional environment. So in terms of the legislation, you can talk about the Labor Act or the Business Act, which we looked at it in our last lecture. One complex aspect under the macro environment is the international markets. So the international market, which is very, very complex in terms of the fact that each country has its own set of environmental, and as a country has its own environmental variables, its own objective, its own production, we're trying to interrelate with other countries, what we term as globalization. So this globalization tends to affect, the macro environment. If you are not, as a country, mostly the large countries tend to benefit at the expense of smaller countries. But we also need to, present ourselves in a position where we can also, through globalization, we can also benefit or make our businesses grow. As we integrate with other world order, we should be able to, look at what the other countries need, transform our resources in there, and also try to get more benefit. Because basically that's how the larger countries started. They try to, look at the needs of other countries and tends to produce for them so that the countries become reliant on them. Now, as we try to achieve self-reliance as a country, we should be able to not just, produce, but also look out for opportunities in the other world situation, because the international market is very complex. International market is very, very complex. For example, the market for petrol, market for gold. Basically, one thing that happens is that if you're a small country, you do not have influence on how you want to sell your resources. So the best thing for you to do is to add value to them. So most African countries are not able to do well because we export into the international market at raw value, at raw commodities. So raw commodities do not get the needed price, but if we transform them into finished goods, we realize that we'll be able to achieve the best of the resources. So in our discussion so far, looking at all these sub-environments, the conditions and the variables underlying all these environments and how they are interrelated, As I've been saying, it can lead to either an opportunity or threat to the country. So an opportunity is basically a favorable condition or trend in the market environment that can be exploited to the business advantage. So basically, whenever there's a change, and management can make sure that it leads to the benefit of businesses, then it seems that that is an opportunity. And it also becomes a threat when it basically becomes an unfavoring condition for the business, because some of the changing pattern tends to lead to business failures deliberately, and sometimes it forgoes, it escapes management effort. Management are unable to control some of the changing patterns, and they are unable to buy new machines to meet or mitigate. And looking at even what has happened through this COVID situation, realizes that most companies who were unable to use technological means to survive have really been affected. So the changing pattern is really a threat to other countries. We continue with our last discussion for today, and basically it's on the concept of scanning. So here, as all these things goes on, as all the changing takes on, as you identify opportunities and you see threats, how do you try to keep yourself updated? So the process of measuring, projecting, and evaluating the changes in the different environmental variables is what we call the environmental scanning. So as a business individual, you should be able to find a means of monitoring. You should be able to find a means of measuring how is your business changing? What is the world today? So basically, most businesses have a research department that tends to monitor and give recommendations. Should we go online? How do we adjust ourselves? Because most businesses that have been able to thrive today is that they've used certain means to adjust. For example, even banks. I mean, if banks were not able to adjust to the fact that this time they need to use certain means of technologies to survive, banks would have also been affected. Today, they are able to sustain because aside the environment, the regulations protecting them so that there are no new form of things going on. And you can easily transact with them. You can easily pay. You can easily deposit without even necessarily going into investing in a bank. So as a business environment, you should be able to, because at first, banks basically used to concern with you going to the bank, depositing at a particular point, and the long queue, the stress, and the things. People saw that no, in terms of financial technology, fintech that are going on, people can transact with less human interface. People can do businesses with less human interface. How does this relationship, how does this banks tend to adjust? So it was one of the things that you realize is that it has helped banks to get sustained to this level and makes them even more better and efficient in today's world. So as a business canon, you should be able to know the basic relationship of a business and its environment, the nature of the environment within which the business operates, and the source of the business. We conclude this, continue, but in terms of the method of scanning, you should be able to update yourself with published information. You should be able to, add primary information, that is investigation or in terms of research, as I said, to the business so that you know what should be the next step. Because even the businesses that we see today, in the future to come, it is not going to be in that sense. And in the future to come, it's not going to be a pick and pay shop. I believe some firms and some countries have even started where you don't know even to enter. You just drive and just go to the shop and you just pick it up. In terms of even the filling station today, and some filling stations, you need not to see human. You just go, you take it, you pay, you slot in your card and you pay. All the world is changing pattern. It's all needs scanning. You need to scan, and once you get the information, you get the projection, you'll be able to, develop the necessary skill that are needed to make sure businesses thrive. So in our discussion today, we have looked at the business's environment, the sub environment, either the micro level, the market level, all the macro level and how interrelated they are, how complex they are, and how they pose a threat to the business or becomes an opportunity. And you can only do this is that you need to position yourself, you need to scan the environment. That is to get to give you the projection as to how things should go and make sure that the business will be in a better position for the changes tomorrow. On this note, I'll say thank you, and we'll go back to our discussion and we'll continue with the discussion there. Go back to the platform and continue with the discussion there.